Some evenings stick with you, not because of what happens in them, but because of how unremarkable they seem at first. It was a Thursday, an ordinary Thursday, when I was sitting on the couch with my phone in hand, doing something I'd been putting off for weeks, cleaning up my friends list on Facebook. It's one of those little rituals of tidying up, where you scroll through your contacts and mentally check boxes. Saw this person yesterday, haven't talked to this one in 3 years, and who even is this? At some point, my thumb stopped on a name, Cass. I looked at it a few seconds longer than the others, not because I was hesitating about whether to delete her. I'd made that decision a week earlier. It was just that right next to her name, a thin colored ring blinked on the screen. It meant one thing, a new story. I rarely open Facebook. Honestly, almost never. Instagram, Telegram, anything else, sure, but not this platform, which for me had long since turned into a digital archive of people I no longer talk to. So the fact that I even saw that notification was almost an accident. A second of hesitation, and I tapped it. The photo didn't load right away. First a blurry gray field, then outlines, and finally a sharp image. A poster. Gold letters, the silhouette of a building I recognized instantly because I'd heard about it so many times, it had practically become part of my own vocabulary. The Metropolitan Opera. Beneath the photo, a caption written with an enthusiasm that's impossible to fake. Finally, I can't wait for this day. I didn't close the phone right away. I just sat there, holding it in front of me, staring at a screen that had long since gone dark and now only showed my own blurred reflection. The room was quiet. Somewhere outside, a car drove past. Somewhere in the next apartment, someone turned on the tap. And I sat there trying to understand why this seemingly tiny thing, a stranger's post about an upcoming trip to the opera, had settled into my chest with such a strange, heavy weight. To explain that feeling, I have to go back, quite a bit further back, to where all of this started. The fall that year came in warm, one of those Septembers that still holds on to summer's leniency, while October only hints at the cold to come. Cass and I met in some ordinary way that's hard to even reconstruct in detail now. Mutual friends, a random conversation, a handful of messages that turned into a desire to actually meet. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just two people who suddenly wanted to spend time together. The first few weeks were easy. We talked about everything and nothing at once. Movies, work, small, everyday annoyances that for some reason are funnier to talk about than they should be. Cass had this rare gift, the ability to listen, as if whatever you were saying actually mattered. Not performed, not out of politeness, but genuinely. And I think I got used to that feeling of being heard pretty quickly. Around the second week of knowing each other, we went to a restaurant together for the first time. Nothing special, a small place near downtown, dim lighting, a menu that tried to look fancier than it actually was. We laughed at the waiter struggling to pronounce one of the dish names in French, and at the fact that neither of us really understood what was written on the menu anyway. That was the first time I saw the habit, though at the time I had no idea it would turn into something I'd spend months thinking about. "I'll have this," Cass said, pointing at an item near the bottom of the menu, where the biggest, most expensive portions usually hide. The waiter looked a little surprised too. "That dish is meant for 2 people, sometimes 3. Are you sure?" "Absolutely," she said, with a smile that left no room for doubt. I just smiled back and didn't say anything. I figured, well, maybe she's really hungry. Maybe she likes trying a bit of everything. People are different. Everyone has their quirks, and I wasn't about to turn it into an issue on our second date. When the food arrived, I understood the scale of the order. A massive platter, so densely packed with dishes that the waitress had to balance carefully to get it to the table without spilling anything. The smell was overwhelming. I remember even thinking it might be the best dinner I'd had in a month. But something strange happened. We each ate a few bites. I tried something from the edge, she tried the centerpiece dish, and then somehow the appetite just evaporated. We kept talking, laughing, going over some small things, while the food sat on the table, noticeably untouched. "You want anything else?" I asked when the Conversation went quiet for a moment. "No, I'm good. I think I'm full," Cass answered, even though her plate was still nearly full. At the end of the evening, she asked the waiter to box up the leftovers. Not half of it, almost all of it, a whole container, which she set neatly beside her bag, as if it were the most important thing she was taking home that night. I didn't think much of it at the time. Some people like taking food home. It's normal, even economical. I paid the bill, we walked outside, and the evening continued with an easy stroll, during which we didn't mention food again. If it had happened just once, I probably never would have thought about it again. But it kept happening, again and again. Every single dinner we had at a restaurant followed the exact same script, as if someone had written an invisible screenplay, and we, without quite realizing it, were performing it. Cass would open the menu. Her eyes would drift down to the largest portions, and she'd stop there every time. We'd taste the food, a little, not much, and then spend the rest of the evening talking, laughing, occasionally arguing about something trivial while the food went cold on the table, barely touched. And every time, a container of leftovers she'd take with her. I started noticing the pattern around our fourth or fifth dinner like this. At first, it was just an observation, the kind you make when you notice someone always sits on a certain side of the table, or always orders their coffee without sugar. A small thing, but small things have a way of piling up, and at some point, they stop being small. I remember one specific evening, at a new place, a Georgian restaurant a coworker had recommended. Cass, as usual, ordered something monumental. An Ajarian khachapuri, roughly the size of a large pizza, plus a few extra dishes on top. I said, half joking, "You really think we're gonna finish all this?" She laughed, and there was nothing guarded or guilty in that laugh. "Oh, don't worry. Whatever we don't finish, we'll take home." And that's exactly what happened. We tasted it, as always, praised the chef, then went back to talking about something else entirely. And the khachapuri just sat there in front of us, cooling, losing the appetizing look it had when it first arrived. I didn't think much about the money at the time, less than you'd expect. The bills were adding up, of course. Big portions cost accordingly, but I'm not the kind of person for whom that alone would become a real source of stress. I just, almost without noticing, started adjusting my own orders. Instead of a full meal, I'd choose something smaller, a salad, a light appetizer, to keep the total from stretching past what I could comfortably afford. It was a quiet, unremarked upon adjustment, one I didn't even discuss with myself directly. I just did it. But it wasn't the money that kept me up at night. It was the question of why. At night, when I lay awake, my thoughts kept circling back to it. Why would someone order that much food every single time if she wasn't going to eat most of it anyway? Why take the leftovers so consistently, as if it weren't a coincidence, but a necessity? I sorted through the possibilities like a deck of cards, laying them out one by one. The first option, maybe something was going on at home. Maybe there was someone else who needed feeding, a relative, a roommate, someone she hadn't mentioned. But every time I tried to picture that scenario, it felt too specific, too elaborate for such a simple explanation. The second option, hunger. Plain, ordinary hunger, of a kind someone might be embarrassed to admit to. This thought scared me the most, because if it was true, it meant I had spent months sitting across from someone who needed help while I quietly watched the ritual play out without ever asking a direct question. The third option, the darkest of the three. Maybe there was something else entirely going on. Maybe some hidden motive I couldn't even guess at. This thought came rarely, and every time it did, I scolded myself for it. It felt unfair to suspect someone who had given me no other reason for doubt, aside from this one strange habit. I turned these possibilities over and over, like trying to solve an equation with too many unknowns, and every time I hit the same wall. To find out the truth, I would just have to ask, but I couldn't. It sounds strange saying it now, looking back. Cass and I talked about plenty of personal things. Family, fears, past relationships, plans for the future. You'd think one simple question about food would be the easiest of all, but every time I got close to asking it, something stopped me. Fear of offending her, fear of hearing an answer that would change everything, or maybe just a reluctance to break the easy rhythm that still existed between us. So I stayed quiet, and instead of asking the person sitting across from me at the table, I took a different route. I wrote about it to strangers on the internet. I remember that evening fairly clearly. I sat at my laptop for a long time, wording and rewording sentences, trying to lay out the situation in a way that sounded neither like a complaint nor an accusation, just an honest, bewildered question from someone who didn't know what to do. I described everything: the dinners, the portions, the leftovers, the money, my own guesses. I hit post and closed the laptop, as if that alone would rid me of the responsibility for what I'd just done. Responses started coming in almost immediately. Some people advised me to just have an honest conversation. Some offered the wildest theories, from the mundane to scenarios that belonged in a detective show. Some accused me of making a problem out of nothing. So what if she likes big portions? None of my business. But there were also voices saying something that deep down, I think I already understood. Behavior like this often points to something far more serious than a simple habit or a quirk. I read those comments late at night, lit only by the glow of my phone, and felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Relief because it turned out I wasn't the only one who'd noticed this kind of thing in someone else. Unease because the more I read, the harder it became to ignore the thought that staying silent any longer was the wrong choice. A few more weeks passed before I finally worked up the nerve. It didn't happen at a restaurant, the way I'd originally planned, but on an ordinary evening at my place, while we were sitting on the couch watching a movie neither of us was really paying attention to. I muted the TV, and Cass looked at me, surprised. "Something wrong?" she asked. I took a long time choosing my words. I remember my heart pounding far harder than it should have for such a simple question. "I want to ask you something," I started. "And please don't think I'm judging you or anything like that. I've just noticed. You always order the biggest portion at restaurants. We barely touch it, and you take it all home, every single time. And I can't stop thinking about it." For a few seconds, silence fell. It felt much longer than it actually was. I watched something shift in her face. Not offense, but something more complicated. A mix of exhaustion and relief, as if she'd been waiting for this question for a long time and dreading it at the same time. "I figured you wouldn't notice," she said, quietly, finally. "Or that you'd notice but never ask." "I noticed right away," I replied. "I just didn't know how to ask without it sounding wrong." She sighed, and what she told me next changed everything I thought I understood about those months. It turned out things at home were genuinely difficult. I don't want to go into overly specific detail. It was her story, her pain, and I don't feel it's my place to recount every particular of it. But the essence was simple and heavy at the same time. The food she took home from our dinners wasn't a nice bonus. It was often a necessity, a real source of meals for the next several days. "I'm embarrassed to even say this," she continued, looking somewhere off to the side, not at me. "That's why I didn't want you to find out. It felt easier to just quietly take the container than to explain why I needed it." I sat there listening, and I felt all my earlier guesses about hidden hunger, about hidden motives, suddenly take on a real human face. This was no longer an abstract puzzle to discuss with strangers online. This was someone I knew, someone I'd already started to genuinely care about, and who had been quietly carrying a weight I hadn't even truly grasped. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I asked, though I already knew roughly what the answer would be. "Because it's not something that's easy to say," she answered, "especially early in a relationship, especially when you don't know how the other person will react." I took her hand and said what turned out to be the simplest and at the same time the most important thing I said that whole evening. "Let me help." The next few weeks were, I think, the warmest our relationship ever got. It was as if that honest conversation had lifted some invisible weight, not just off her, but off me too. We talked through concrete ways I could help. Nothing dramatic, nothing that looked like charity or pity, just practical support between two people who cared about each other. Dinners at restaurants no longer carried that strange undertone that used to hang over the table unspoken. Cass still took leftovers home sometimes, but now it didn't feel like a mystery. It was just sensible thrift, understood and accepted by both of us. I remember thinking back then that maybe the hardest part was behind us, that the honesty, though difficult to get to, had ultimately brought us closer. That now that the biggest secret was out in the open, only simpler, calmer times lay ahead. I was wrong. It happened about 2 weeks after that conversation. There was no warning, no hint, no argument that might have prepared me for what was coming. At first, it looked like an ordinary delay in a reply. I'd sent something routine. Have a good day, or a question about weekend plans, and got no response. That had happened before. People get busy, so I didn't think much of it. But a day passed, then a second. I texted again, this time with a little more concern in my tone. Silence. I tried calling. The ring went on for a long time, then just cut off. Not a rejected call, more like some mechanical termination, as if the number simply wasn't answering. I sent a message on another app, left on red. Tried yet another, the same silence. Days turned into a week. A week turned into 2. I ran through every possible explanation in my head, the same way I'd once run through possible reasons for her strange habit with the food. Maybe something happened? Maybe she got sick? Maybe her phone broke and she just had no way to reach me? I even considered messaging mutual friends, though honestly, we didn't have many. But deep down, I already knew the truth, even if I didn't want to admit it to myself. This wasn't an accident. It was a decision. Her decision. To disappear without giving any explanation, without a single final word that could have brought some kind of closure to the story. There was no fight. There wasn't a breakup in the usual sense of the word. A conversation where someone says, we should stop, or I can't do this anymore. One day, someone who had recently held my hand and thanked me for being willing to help her simply stopped existing in my life, as abruptly as a light going out. The first weeks after that were hard. I won't pretend otherwise. I replayed every detail of our relationship in my head, trying to find the moment that would explain everything. Did I say something wrong? Did my offer to help, despite every good intention, somehow scare her or offend her? Did the conversation about food, which was supposed to bring us closer, actually turn out to be the final straw? I never found an answer. And honestly, over time, I stopped searching so hard for one. Life, as it always does, moved on. Work, friends, ordinary daily routines gradually filled the space that thoughts of Cass used to occupy. The pain didn't vanish instantly, but it dulled, turned into something distant, almost abstract. Months went by. I started seeing other people, though honestly, none of those turned into anything serious. Life kept moving forward, the way it always does, whether we're ready for it or not. And that's how I ended up at that same Thursday I started this story with. An evening of tidying up my contact list. An evening when I accidentally stumbled onto her story. But to really understand why that post hit me the way it did, I have to mention one more detail. A detail I'd nearly forgotten myself until I saw that poster. 2 months before all of it, before the conversation about food, before the brief stretch of calm, before the sudden disappearance, it was Cass's birthday. I remember planning ahead, trying to figure out what to get someone who never seemed to directly ask for gifts, but always had these quiet, unspoken dreams. And one of those dreams, which she'd mentioned a few times, almost in passing, always with a particular spark in her eyes, was the Metropolitan Opera. "I've always wanted to go there," she said once, when we happened to be talking about art. "Ever since I was a kid, honestly. But the tickets cost a small fortune, so I guess it'll just stay a dream." She said it lightly, without any real regret in her voice, as if she'd long since made peace with the idea that some dreams just stay dreams. But I remembered that sentence. I remembered that look, that fleeting, involuntary longing that surfaced for a second and then disappeared behind her usual smile. So when the time came to figure out a birthday gift, the choice felt obvious. I spent a long time searching for tickets. Turned out it really wasn't cheap, and it wasn't always easy to find open seats on the right date. But eventually, I found one ticket. Just one, because the performance fell on a weekday, and I knew my work schedule wouldn't let us go together. Buying 2 tickets, knowing one of them would go unused, seemed pointless. I bought it and sent the ticket directly to her email, along with the QR code needed for entry. I wanted everything done right, so she wouldn't have to worry about printing a paper ticket or anything like that. Just open her phone and show the screen at the door. When her birthday came, I handed her a printed confirmation, just a sheet of paper with the show information, the date, the time. I remember the look on her face when she realized what it was. "This is..." She went quiet for a few seconds, staring at the paper as if she couldn't quite believe it. "This is incredible. Thank you. Really." She hugged me tightly, and there was something genuine in that hug. Nothing performed about it. I remember thinking at the time that it was maybe one of the best gifts I'd ever given anyone. Not because it was expensive, but because it was exactly right. Because I'd understood what she actually wanted. But then something strange happened. After that evening, Cass never brought up the ticket again. Not once did she mention the date of the show, ask whether I could rearrange my schedule to join her for at least part of it, or share any anticipation about the upcoming trip. It was as if the gift had been received, the thanks given, and the subject closed. I didn't think much of it at the time. People are different. Some love discussing upcoming events in detail well in advance. Others prefer to keep their anticipation to themselves instead of pouring it out loud. I decided it was just one of her personality traits, and I never gave it a second thought. And then the dinners with the massive portions began. Then my own overthinking, the post on Reddit, the difficult conversation, the brief closeness. And after that, the sudden, unexplained silence. The opera ticket got lost somewhere in that flow of events, pushed aside by far more urgent matters. I simply forgot about it. Completely, without a trace left in my memory. Until that Thursday, when Facebook's algorithm reminded me of it in the worst possible way. So let's go back to the beginning. To the couch, to the phone, to the ring of notification around her profile picture. I stared at that poster for a long time. Too long for an ordinary social media post. Gold letters on a dark background, the silhouette of a building I'd only ever seen in photos, but which I now felt somehow I could recognize with my eyes closed. And the caption, full of unmistakable excitement. "Finally! I can't wait for this day!" At first, my mind refused to put the pieces together. Just a coincidence, I told myself. Not many people dream about the opera. It was entirely possible she'd finally gone out and bought a ticket herself, unrelated to anything I'd once given her. But something in me knew it wasn't such a simple coincidence. I opened my email, my old one from back then, and started scrolling back, looking for that same confirmation page I'd printed out at the time. The show date matched the date on the poster in her story. Exactly. It was the same ticket. The very one I'd bought months earlier as a birthday present. The one she never mentioned again after that first thank you. The one I myself had forgotten about, until life reminded me of it in the strangest possible way. I sat on the couch, holding the phone, trying to understand what exactly I was feeling. Not anger, not in any pure form anyway. Not quite hurt either, though something like it was there too. More some strange, heavy realization that a part of the story I'd considered finished actually had one more chapter I hadn't even known existed. A ticket, bought with care and thought, for someone who had mattered to me. A gift meant to symbolize a dream finally coming true. And now, here was that dream, actually coming true. Just without me. Without a single mention of where the ticket came from. Without so much as a word of thanks, or even an acknowledgement that I was the one who'd made that moment possible. I didn't write to her. There was no point. That chapter of our story had closed long ago, and whatever I wrote now, a question, a reproach, even a simple reminder of the past, probably wouldn't change or clarify anything. I just closed the app, set the phone face down on the table, and sat there in silence for a long while, listening to the city outside continue living its ordinary life, indifferent to anyone else's drama. Sometimes I think about that evening at the opera. I picture Cass sitting in a dimly lit hall, watching the performance she'd wanted to see for so long. Maybe not even thinking about where the ticket in her hands came from. Or maybe she does think about it. Maybe somewhere at the edge of her mind, a thought about me flickers by. About our dinners, about that sheet of paper I handed her with such hope of making her happy. I'll never know for sure. And honestly, over time, I've come to understand that I don't need that answer anymore. The story ended the way it ended, without explanations, without a final conversation, without a neatly tied bow at the end. One day, someone simply vanished from my life, and months later, reminded me of her existence with a single social media post I happened to see almost by accident. Maybe that's just how some stories go. They don't get a clean ending. They just dissolve, leaving behind only scattered details. A container of half-eaten food, a sheet of paper with information about a show, a brief notification on an app you barely use. And sometimes, completely by accident, those details assemble themselves into a picture you never asked to see, but one you can no longer take apart.